understanding and thinking about that you're not going to be here and that there is an end point to this all. Because when you can do that, it's a great, it almost takes a lot of the pressure off. Because it's like, you are going to be gone. You're not going to be able to take things with you. And appreciating the daily things that are happening in your life become more powerful, more important. Hey everyone, and I am talking to you. This is going to be such an amazing show, one that's going to have you not just thinking about your future, but thinking about your past and even further behind than just your past. So we're talking with an amazing woman. Her name is Dr. Amy Robbins. She is a clinical psychologist for almost 20 years, but most importantly, Dr. Amy has experience in both traditional psychotherapy and spiritual intuition. You guys are starting to see the connection here. She encourages you to awaken to and live your essence, but she does it with the wisdom of death in an unexpectedly positive way. She can help you understand the importance of your emotional health and connect those kind of those dots that lead you to an actual more meaningful life, not one of confusion. Does that sound like this is where we need to go? And trust me, we vet all of these people. This is going to be so good. So through her podcast, Life, Death, and the Space Between, she provides an ever-growing library of resources to explore the complex synergy between the psychological and spiritual. And that empowers you to know your true self, which, you know what? It is a quest, isn't it? But if you can just be open to this conversation, wow, so much is going to come from it. Hey, Dr. Amy, so good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Hilary. So excited to be here finally. We've gone back and forth.
I know, we really have. But we first met, I think it was, over 6 months ago, and we were just like, oh my God. I mean, there were so many different ways that we could take this. And I was really fascinated. I have a psychology degree. I'm so geeking out on every way, shape, or form what we're going to talk about today. But your journey is something that is very untraditional to the profession that you're in. And I'd love to have people understand how you're even connected and how you have connected the dots with death and life and really looking at transformative type of approaches to therapy. It's incredible. So let's start with your specific relaunch journey here.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. I'm so excited to be here today and to talk with you and your audience about this topic that I'm so passionate about. So when I was 18 years old, I lost my aunt. She had juvenile onset diabetes. She was waiting for a kidney and pancreas transplant. And while she was waiting for the transplant, they needed to make sure that her heart would be strong enough to withstand a transplant, or her whole body would be strong enough. They realized that her heart was not going to be strong enough to withstand the transplant. So they went in to do heart surgery, and she ended up dying on the table. She was 48 years old at the time. She had 2 young kids, college and high school age. And I was a freshman in college. And it was really the first super close, what I call out of order death, right? She was young. She had young kids. Yeah. It didn't make sense.
No.
And at the time, my first experience in grief, true, profound grief, and seeing those around me, my mom, who was, they were sisters, and my aunt was really like a second mother to me. So to see the depths of that pain and to witness your parent experiencing the depth of that pain, and also to only be home for a very short time and then go back to my life at college. I came home just for the weekend. I'm Jewish. We had a shiva, came in for the funeral, had the shiva, and went right back to school. And so my own grief process was stunted in a way because I went back to my life, lived my life, but then started to develop tremendous anxiety around how my life was similar to hers. And was I going to end up with a similar fate? She was the oldest of three children. I was the oldest of three children. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so you're saying it was similar from, and I'm glad that you're saying this, it was similar from the fact that you were the oldest. Any other similarities? Because to have anxiety about it, anxiety is a terrible thing because it just keeps you on edge at all points. But what else did you feel was this connection with your aunt?
Yeah, so she had, again, I was 18, so I was still developing at the time. Sure. But she had this incredible life that she had lived. Her husband was a trader, very well off, had sort of the dream life that you would want on paper. Beautiful home, 2 kids, a beautiful golden retriever, beautiful life on paper. Life, like that, right? Yeah. On paper. And then things started to fall apart for her. Her marriage fell apart. She went through divorce, ended up needing to go back to work because she didn't have a degree in which she was supporting herself. So she had to go back to work. She was working at a travel agency because of her diabetes. It was a difficult, they weren't like unfavorable conditions. It wasn't like she went back to work in a factory, but because of issues related to diabetes, like circulation and things like that, and it not being the right temperature in the place, her extremities, she started to have issues with her extremities, and it just sort of spiraled from there.
Did she have diabetes when she was still with her husband, or did she develop that after? So
it was juvenile onset.
Oh, juvenile. Okay. So it had been with her pretty much, as long as you as an 18-year-old could remember.
Right. And she had, what had happened, and this is an important part of the story. My grandfather's was a pediatrician. And that day when you had tonsils, you radiated tonsils. And when you had tonsillitis multiple times. So they had radiated her tonsils, which he believes, and many doctors did, she developed measles as a result of that, and then an autoimmune disorder. And they think that that's what led to the onset of the diabetes. So there was this chain of events, and you can imagine as a pediatrician having your child be ill, the meaning that might have in terms of what you could have done differently, and one's feelings of guilt around that, knowing what they knew then versus what we know now. Obviously, that's not a treatment for tonsils at this point. And so it was just, and I really kind of hooked into this notion of, I need to be able to support myself. That is essential to my future existence. Like, that is what I sort of extrapolated from this whole experience, was I had to be able to stand on my 2 feet, and I was never going to find myself in a position where she found herself, which was taking whatever she could to sustain herself and her family, and at the expense of her health. Which was ultimately what really happened.
And I am sure the women listening out there really can appreciate this, because I think that the generation, especially around your generation, my generation, we grew up with that concept of like, I'm not going to count on anyone. I'm going to count on myself. Because we saw our moms, we saw aunts, we saw other family members, friends, parents that were just like, as women, not going to do that. Right. So we really do develop these belief systems when we're really young that like, that's not going to be me. So you're going through this and you're like, I'm not going to end up in a travel agency where my extremities are cold, and I'm going to make sure that I can support myself. Yep.
And take care of my physical health, whatever that looks like. And a lot of this too is sort of looking back now, knowing and putting all these pieces together in terms of how they showed up for me. Right. And I think what ended up happening was my senior year in college, when I was looking for jobs, I started having these intense panic attacks because I was getting rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter, and thinking, this is a path to her demise, to my demise, which was her demise. Like, I had made these connections.
What did these panic attacks look like?
I just remember intense heart palpitations, sweaty palms, difficulty breathing, falling to the floor. I mean, I could tell you exactly where I was when it happened, the letter I opened, like all of those pieces, feeling like this out of body experience, tingling, a very physical experience. And I was a psych major in undergrad as well. So I sort of had an idea of what was happening, but certainly mental health then is not what it is now.
Right.
So it wasn't like I wasn't going to tell anybody, where now I feel like you'd be like, oh, I think I might be having a panic attack. And, 20 people would be like, oh, here's what you do. Like then it wasn't spoken about. And so I really kept it inside, and the anxiety increased over time. I ended up coming back. I got a job selling radio airtime, which was not at all what I wanted to do, was miserable, hated it, quit, went back to waiting tables. So here I had a degree from the University of Michigan, and I was waiting tables. And not that there's anything wrong with waiting tables. It's actually a wonderful way to make a living and to understand people. I think there's no better training in understanding.
You got to have a tremendous amount of patience to be in that profession.
And it taught me so much, and I'm incredibly grateful. Right. And I feel like everybody should do it at some point in their life, because it really gives you a sense of the cross section of humanity. And then really took a deep dive psychologically into what was happening for me, did a lot of grief work around the loss of my aunt, a lot of work on myself, my own anxiety, but the anxiety was still there and it wasn't going away. I ended up going back to grad school, figuring out.
Okay, before Dr. Amy, before you move on, because I think a lot of people here work on myself, right? I did a lot of grief work. I did a lot of work on myself. And for some, it's like, what the heck does that even mean? What does it mean that you did grief work and you did a lot of work on yourself? What were you actually doing?
I was in therapy and I was feeling it, all of it.
So allowing yourself to really go there.
The sadness, the shame, the embarrassment, the sadness around her death, the shame of where I was and where I thought I should be in my life. The disappointment in myself in that same vein. Like how was this where I was? I'm supposed to be somewhere different than where I am.
Listen to what you just said, which I think is, so many of us, myself included, we beat ourselves up because we think we're supposed to be at a certain place and we haven't gotten there. We haven't arrived. And so we have the sense of disappointment. We have the sense of feeling sad. We're embarrassed that, we're not as far along. We don't have this, we don't have that. And I know that was one major reason that I created the 3HQ framework. And I used it with clients, and I leaned into it because for so long, I just felt like there's just something so missing. What is it? And I kept thinking it was the outward, like, oh my God, happiness. It's like, this is the image of happiness, right? And even as you said, on paper, that really resonated with me.
Right.
It's that on paper, it's that the visual, but yet the internal feelings, which you're really hitting on, the heart, right? In the 3HQ, it's that heart space, the emotional blocks, the emotional traumas, all of these things, as you described, that working on myself, that you had to uncover and go there, of feeling of sadness, disappointment, embarrassment. The list goes on and on with those self-sabotaging words. Yeah, it's tough. So how long did you do this? And then what happened? How
long did I dig in?
Yeah.
I'm still digging.
Isn't that the truth, girl? My gosh, I feel it too. Yes. I'm digging my way out right now.
Yep.
But it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime journey.
It is a lifetime journey. And I think that's really important for people to know and to understand, is that the journey of knowing yourself, which I believe is the most spiritual journey you can be on, is just that. It's knowing yourself. It's digging into those painful feelings that we all experience, because we're all human and there's no avoiding it. But it's when you can hold that you can hold those painful feelings, but also those joyous feelings simultaneously, that's where I believe we can really live. And you have to be able to, what people say, do the work, right? Get to that, to be able to feel those feelings, to speak them, to say, I'm so ashamed of where I am right now. I'm so embarrassed to be waiting tables and have someone say to me, is this all you do? And feeling like, well, where did you go to college? And I'd say, University of Michigan. And they'd look at me. And that shame was so profound for me. And I had to be able to work through that in order to move into a place of really being my true, authentic version of myself.
So when you started to dig deep, and did you find that as you went deeper, you became more shameful, you became more disappointed, like, oh God, there's just so much here? Or did you really feel like, you know what, with every step you were uncovering a little bit more and giving yourself a little grace along the way? Because I know that there's two philosophies. Some people are like, oh God, it was so intense, it made me feel like, I had to reach that rock bottom place. And others are like, you know what, I was able to just turn it around right then and there, and I didn't have to go any deeper. What about you?
I think that, again, like, you're always kind of, if you're on a lifelong journey like this, you're always finding these bits and pieces that will pop their heads up forever. And for me, certainly the shame, that's not something I'm very consciously aware of feeling. And I don't think it's unconsciously there for me anymore. But it was a process over time of really allowing myself to feel it, letting it percolate, being comfortable sitting with that, realizing that it wasn't going to overwhelm me. It wasn't going to dig its claws in and never let go, but that in time it would release, it would soften. And that's what I see with my patients too. It's like when you're sitting with someone in the depth of whatever feeling they have, eventually that feeling softens.
It's so true. Well, we do have to take a quick break, but when we come back, I love that we often hear about start with the end in mind, but what you do is you start with the end in mind, like even further back, right? The other side. And so I want to understand from you when we come back, how did that actually happen? What was the turning point where you're like, wait, I'm going to go there. I don't want to go there, but I'm going to go there. So when we come back, we're going to go there. Bye. This episode is brought to you by my very own labor of love, my most recent book, Relaunch. This book is a collection of my stories, other stories, and is a motivational guide to living a new 3HQ lifestyle, sparking your heart to ignite your life. It's available for purchase via Amazon. Get ready to try on the 3HQ method that I've been using for years throughout my entire life, reaching the next level in all areas, both professionally and personally. Get your copy today at www.therelaunchbook.com. Welcome back, everyone. I am here with Dr. Amy Robbins, and we are about to cross over. Yes, we are keeping into start with the end in mind, but we're not talking about the future. We're going to be talking about the past even further than when you entered onto this planet, and how this all ties in, and how you can actually leverage the concept around death and around life and around death again. So Dr. Amy, thank you so much for being here. And before we took a quick break, we were talking about your experience, your aunt passing over, not being able to sustain the surgery, and then you really couldn't continue in the field that you thought you were going to be doing. You end up taking a server job, and next thing you know, you're really reevaluating life. You're reevaluating panic attacks that you had, the traumas that you've had. And then what happened to you that really impacted, wow, I'm actually going to go down this path now?
I didn't have a choice. The path showed up for me. So I decided to go back to grad school for clinical psychology. And I was in grad school at the time. And my cousin, my aunt's son, was getting married. And I had a visit. My dead aunt showed up at my bedside with messages for me that, and really not messages for me, messages through me for my mother and my uncle. And the first image that I saw, and I see these in images, and it came to me in the sleep state between when you come out of a deep sleep and you're not yet fully awake, or you've fallen back to sleep, because that's when our theta waves are in full action. It's the same as a meditative state. And so some people would say it is a dream. I will not call it that anymore. It was clearly a visit. It felt very different than a dream. And she came to me, and in that I saw my mom standing at her kitchen sink in the house where I grew up. And she said, "Tell your mom I will be there. She doesn't need to be upset that I'm not going to be at the wedding." And then she went on to show me my uncle pushing my cousin in a stroller. He was young at the time, and said that I hear him when he talks to me. When he's outside pushing the stroller or going for a walk, I hear him. And I woke up and I turned to my husband, and my dog was barking at the time, which was so fascinating too, because I think animals can sense things. And I looked at him and I said, "Aunt Linda was just here." And he said, "What?" And I said, "She was just here." And he did not believe in this at the time. He's come around to it, given kind of a series of events that have since happened.
So let me go back. You have this image, and I think a lot of people are fascinated by what do these images look like? Are they lights? Are they actual images of the person, like your aunt? How did she come to you?
It was like a movie. It's like watching a movie. And she was very clear. Like how I saw her was very clear. And she looked like for me, she looked like she had looked to me in life, but healthier. She actually looked very healthy. Whereas in life, she never really looked healthy to me. She always kind of looked sickly, but her skin looked really beautiful and luminous. And she looked like a healthier version of herself. And I have now since realized I actually had a visit before this visit that I didn't know was a visit, but it was, in which she came to me and said, I'm okay. I'm healthy. Let everybody know I'm healing, and everybody can be okay knowing that I'm healing. Now, at that time, I think I was in college when that happened, and I thought it was a dream. So,
but you did mention, you said it felt different this time than a dream. What is that difference?
The difference is that it is as real to me today as it was when I had it. It is still as clear to me today. And I think when I have dreams, certainly, I often don't remember my dreams. I remember pieces of dreams. They're an amalgam of life. You know, my aunt is not really my aunt. She's actually my teacher, and my mom isn't my mom. She's a combination of two people. It just didn't feel linear, and dreams don't feel linear. And this felt very linear with very clear messages. There was no interpretation needed around what was the symbolism behind that. It was like, tell your mom this information. And I did. I called my mom that morning. I said, I had this weird dream, because that's all I knew at the time. That was my language around it. And Aunt Linda came to me and she told me, "Don't be upset. You don't need to cry. She's going to be at the wedding." My mom started crying. She said she was standing at her kitchen sink the night before, talking to Linda, saying, "I can't believe you're not going to be at the wedding." So
powerful.
That happened. Then I called my uncle, who's an orthopedic surgeon who believes in none of this, right? The material world is all, it's what we can see. There's nothing more. And I shared with him the message, and he said, "That's when I talk to her. I talk to her when I'm out walking or running. And I can't believe that she actually is telling you she can hear me."
You know what's so great when you said orthopedic surgeon? My dad was an orthopedic surgeon. My grandfather was an orthopedic surgeon. That's what I thought I was going to be when I went into college and turned from that to psychology. And as you're saying this, it's really interesting because in the United States, we're really taught to not believe in afterlife. To really, we don't talk about it. For many people, the first time that they ever talk about it as a family is when the person's gone, right? Gone. And then at that point, you have maybe a memorial, you have a ceremony or something. Sometimes you don't. I know with my grandparents who were killed in car crashes, a car crash, we never addressed it. But it's really fascinating. What do you think with all of the research and studies you've done, what is it about not wanting to really talk about it or feel like, oh, it's kind of the crazier side, it's the woo side of death, of being able to communicate with somebody who has crossed over? What do you think what's going on there?
Well, it's interesting because one, it's very Western to not talk about death. Mm-hmm. In Eastern cultures, they're much more comfortable talking about death, reincarnation. They celebrate it, right? They believe in reincarnation. They believe in the afterlife. And I think in Western culture, we have veered very far away from death to the point that everything we do is an avoidance of the fact that we're going to die. And so there's that piece psychologically, and I understand it. I mean, it's hard to live in a place where you're constantly thinking about the possibility of dying. And I think it enhances how you live when you can have a contemplative death practice that does allow you to ponder every once in a while. Maybe it's every day. For me, I think about it every day. You know what? I am not going to live in this physical body forever, but I also believe my soul lives on, and that my soul is here to experience life from a human perspective, and that my soul is here to grow through obstacles that are put in my path. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about starting with the end in mind, and I think this is what you're referring to, I think about the end of my physical life at this time, and I think about my soul journey over the course of what it took to get here and where it's going after here. And how am I continuing to grow my soul to what I believe is the ultimate kind of soul growth, which is full love, kindness, giving, charity, what some would call like a Christ consciousness or a Buddha consciousness. Now, I'm nowhere near there. I'm still working on it, which goes back to what we talked about in the first part of this segment, is just that working on yourself and knowing the different aspects of what some would say is the shadow part of yourself, the darker part of ourselves that we don't love to take a look at and see. But that the two, to me, really can walk beautifully hand in hand and can really put into perspective a life that can be so meaningful and purpose driven, because you're looking at it from both the soul perspective, but also the physical perspective of this life.
Dr. Amy, this is so powerful, because before my mom died a few years ago, and then my dad died last year. And yes, I've just said that my grandparents, when I was 12, died in a terrible car crash. And we've had suicides in our family. But really, I had never contemplated my own mortality. I assumed I'd live like every other woman in my family into early 100s. And it was really fascinating. I was blessed with people that came into my life about 4 years prior to my mom passing. And it got me ready. Got me ready for her. Even when I didn't know it, things were working to help me process, to help me understand it as much as you can, the death process. But one thing I'd like, because you have such a wealth of knowledge around this, is how, and I highly encourage everyone that's listening to take the step of understanding and thinking about that you're not going to be here and that there is an end point to this all. Because when you can do that, it's a great, it almost takes a lot of the pressure off, because it's like, you are going to be gone. You're not going to be able to take things with you, and appreciating the daily things that are happening in your life become more powerful, more important, more, I love the book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And when you start to really think about it and you have people passing, it really puts it into perspective. But there's a lot of people, and God love you all out there, that haven't had somebody close pass away and are listening and trying to contemplate, and we run, right? We run away from the thought of our mortality because it is scary. What do you do in terms of helping people kind of take that next step in understanding you got to start with the end in mind?
I think, facing the fears around it is really important. So going deep with people and asking the question, what are you afraid of? Where is the fear here? Sometimes the fear is actually around not having lived a meaningful life, which is interesting.
That's
sometimes
really interesting.
Right. So the thing that's holding us, the thing that we want most is also the thing that's holding us holding us back. And I think also just exploring people's exposure to death. If you've never lost someone close to you, have you lost a pet? Have you lost a fish? Have you lost a relationship? Death doesn't have to be about death of a physical person. Death finds us in all kinds of different ways. And I think even as you talk about relaunching, a part of when someone relaunches is dying. And there has to be a process of grieving around whatever is dying. I have 3 beautiful kids, but when I decided there were going to be no more, that was a loss. It was a loss of that phase of my life. I feel like every day is a loss of a day of my life that my kids are getting older. I'm really seeing now how quickly that time goes, that perspective shift for me that I didn't have when they were little. And I was like, oh my gosh, can I just please how am I going to get through the day, let alone the week? And now I'm like, can the time stop? Because
and it's going a lot faster, isn't it?
So much faster. And it's those perspective shifts that I think maybe not thinking about death as the death of a physical experience, like body, but the death in your life that's happening daily, weekly, monthly. A new job is a death, right? Like you lost a job, but you found a job. There's grief in all of this. And
when we can, great way to put it.
And when we can embrace those experiences and really feel all the feelings around them, then death isn't so scary because it's just a transition. It's a transformation.
And your body is constantly, your skin is sloughing off, it's dying, it's leaving you, new cells. It's so true when you put it in perspective. And I'm looking at, right now outside my window, it's pouring rain and I'm seeing the new, blooms coming out, right? That's where you start to think about, with the death of the plants around here and then the life that's coming and the birds and all these great things that are happening. I know people are fascinated though. I want to go back to, you've mentioned in the past, channeling versus understanding of, having conversations with, your aunt or a one-way conversation. What was it? What is channeling to you? Are you a channeler? And has it become more intense now that you've been willing to accept that experience that your aunt came to you?
So I don't think of myself as a channeler. Like I think, channelers, and there's some excellent ones. Paul Selig is one. Lee Harris is a channeler. Both of them have been on my podcast and have talked about their experience. That is literally like the essence, their soul kind of moves out of the way for another energy to come in and communicate messages. And I don't actively do that. Sometimes in meditations, I get messages that feel very much not of my mind. And so I guess you could call that channeling. I'm not really like hooked on what exactly it was with my aunt. And when I get visits and now it ebbs and flows. And that's really why I'm not a practicing medium, is I don't feel like I am as skilled and adept as some people are. And there's some amazing mediums out there that are, it clearly is the gift that they were here to bring to the world. I don't believe that's me. And I think mediumship can be such an incredibly useful healing tool in someone's grief journey, that I want, when someone has the experience of sitting with a medium and their loved one coming through, that it feels profound in that way. And I didn't feel like that could be the experience that I was giving all the time to people. And that
but mediums channel.
I don't know if they would say, I mean, channelers are channelers. They receive information through their clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, clairgustance, and what's the?
Did you say cognizant?
Claircognizance. Thank you. That's the easiest one.
Yeah.
For me.
That's the one I always go. That's my go-to.
Yeah. Okay. And for me too.
Okay. But hold on. So before we go into the next time, we got to take a quick break. And I really want people to understand the difference between all these things that are coming up in society right now, about the difference between medium and channels and psychics and some of these other, words, and most importantly, intuition, right? Because that we all have innately within ourselves. So when we come back, we're going to hear more from Dr. Amy around harnessing your intuition that is inside of you right now. This episode is brought to you by my very own labor of love, my most recent book, Relaunch. This book is a collection of my stories, other stories, and is a motivational guide to living a new 3HQ lifestyle, sparking your heart to ignite your life. It's available for purchase via Amazon. Get ready to try on the 3HQ method that I've been using for years throughout my entire life, reaching the next level in all areas, both professionally and personally. Get your copy today at www.therelaunchbook.com. We are back with Dr. Amy Robbins. I told you this was juicy. It's only going to get even more so. So before we went on a break, we were talking about, again, this concept of channeling. We were talking about mediums. We were talking about, I would want to throw in psychics and the differences there, Dr. Amy. And I know that you have had an opportunity to talk to, and is it talk or do you hear? I don't know if it's a two-way conversation you're having with your aunt. Is it two-way or is this a one-way? You're listening. What do you think?
It's more I am seeing.
You're seeing, but you're hearing her relay messages.
Yes.
I love that. Yes, but.
Yes. And it becomes like more difficult to describe because it's not in the way that we think of it using our five senses.
Okay.
Right?
That makes a lot of sense.
Psychic senses versus the physical senses.
Okay. So let's talk about that, because we've now talked about channeling. We've talked about medium. We've talked about, kind of this hearing or having that feeling. But what about psychics? What is the difference between all of these?
So a psychic is someone who says they have the ability to see the future, to read the future. I'm going to screw this up. I feel like not all psychics are mediums, but all mediums have psychic abilities. So
and for everyone out there that wants to find out more about that, go to Chat GPT and just put it in there.
Right. Exactly.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. And I think the difference is mediums often use their clairs to tap into dead loved ones who've crossed over. Yeah. Channelers literally physically start to embody the energy. That's what I was talking about before, of the entity in which they're relaying the information.
Got it. Okay. So with that said, let's talk about intuition. And by the way, how many more times has your aunt come to visit and have other relatives visited you?
So several relatives, and then it was the patient's dead loved ones that started coming.
Got it.
And that's when it really like catapulted me into this space of, okay, let me explore this. Let me understand this. Let me practice. I trained with a medium. I did what I called my medium internship, where I brought people in and did readings for them and invited their loved ones in, and really tried to learn the skill of connecting with the other side. So it was very purposeful versus just an interruption in my yoga class, which was starting to feel a little bit intrusive, especially when
so funny they were starting to drop in.
Because I started to, you were asking me earlier, like, has it gotten stronger? Because once you start to open those channels up, things will start to come in. And that's where I want to caution people, because I think people really think, oh, that's great. Like, let me open up. You wouldn't just like open up your doors of your house to anybody and say, come on in. You know, you don't, this is the same thing. You don't want to be opening up your clairs, your channel, but even though it's not in the same way we're talking about channeling, but you don't want to sort of open up what I think about is like the crown chakra, where for me, lots of information comes in through the crown, through the third eye. You don't want to be opening up those spaces haphazardly without really knowing what you're doing and working to protect yourself from unknown entities that could be out there. I know this is probably getting a little bit out there for people.
But it's interesting because you have degrees. Like you studied psychology, psychotherapy. I mean, you're a doctor, and yet you're merging these two together. That's what I think is so fascinating, because, it's the Western medicine, and then as you say, the spirituality of this all, the universe, what else is out there. And so when we think about, and I love that you said, you don't open the door to everybody. Exactly. Right. Now, intuition, I love this concept that, when you're at your higher self, we talked 3HQ, the higher self, and you allow your intuitive, like that voice, the experiences that you've had to come in either as a sense, a feeling, a gut,
message. You might hear something.
You might hear it.
Right?
How do you really define it differently than some of these other what do you call mediumship or channeling? What is that? A spiritual tool, a process?
I mean, how do you separate intuition?
It's like a practice. Yeah. So how do you separate intuition, which people are like, I'm definitely, maybe they're thinking I'm not a channeler, I'm not psychic, but everybody is intuitive. It's how we use it.
Right.
It's how we harness it. It's how we grow it, develop it. That becomes so incredible.
So I think that, like anything, it's a practice, right? Like, I went to school for psychology, and I've taken a lot of classes with different mediums and, intuitives and Reiki healers, and tried to understand, okay, what is this world? And what I can say to people is that you have to practice just like anything to start to recognize subtle shifts in energy and vibration. And that's what it is. It's these subtle shifts. And if you're a meditator, you can probably start to understand what I'm talking about, because you'll start to notice in meditation when you're shifting from being very much in your physical body and your mind to maybe feeling outside of your physical body. And it's hard for me to sit here and say to you, this is exactly what it is, but when you feel it, that you're there.
Right.
And that's the same thing with intuition, with claircognizance. It's like you just know in that instant, and it's literally an instant. Oh, that is a message from my higher self.
Yeah.
And it's just that clear. And then when you start overthinking it, you've moved out of intuition and into thought. But in that moment, it is distinctly different, and it is in your intuitive gut hits that you're getting. And I think you can do that through meditation. You can do that through being in nature. You can do that through journaling or automatic writing. I mean, I happen to have this spiritually transformative experience that opened me up. That's one way of getting there, but there are other ways. There's psychedelic trips, which people start to open up these experiences, these channels. There's meditation retreats. There's breath work. There's sound healing. Any of these things, you can open it up through acupuncture.
I look at what happened to me having a near-death experience when I was 2, when I crossed over, and I pushed it away. I'm like, anytime I like kind of had that sense of woo growing up with, as I said, my dad, the doctor, I was like, not going there, not going there, until I finally was like, okay, I really do have a very heightened level, whether it's, intuition, psychic ability. I get it when I'm open to it, when I'm willing. And I do this with my one-on-one clients, but then sometimes, as you're saying, I can't have the door open all the time because it would kind of like freak me out. But I do really, like when I'm in that zone, it's really incredible for the person I'm helping.
Right, because the information just comes in so clearly. And you can also ask for it. Like, even as you were talking to me, I was like, okay, how am I going to describe this? Help me. All right, there it is. And it was like, it's about the vibration. It's about the subtle energy shifts. So I'm tapping into that higher knowing that's giving me the information to help others learn and grow. So it's, and the fluidity of that movement again comes with practice. No one ever likes to really work at it.
No, and practice, as you say, it does take work. It's a muscle. It's going to the gym, and intuition. I always like to say, start out with just something super small, like, hey, I want to hear from this person. Like, just, put it out there. Like, I think I'm going to run into somebody in the next 24 hours that I haven't seen in 4. I mean, it's crazy stuff, but you can start to build on it.
You can start to play with it for sure.
And then you can really start to play with it around your business. That's where I think it becomes like, oh my gosh, people talk about manifestation. And when you add into your tool belt around work, business, not just thinking about, in the 3HQ, just the head and the steps, but you start to put in some of these other, that are the non-distinguishable, they're kind of the invisible tools that we have. That's when you see peak performance go through the roof.
Well, and when we think about manifestation, I think about it more as co-creation. Because manifestation doesn't just happen because you sat and envisioned something happening. You envisioned it happening, and then you took the actions to make that happen. So 100%. You co-created that with the universe to make it happen. Now, you envisioned it, but just if you sat on your couch and just envisioned it, nothing's going to happen.
100%.
It's not going to suddenly appear before you.
It's getting so crystal clear as well. Like, the clearer you can be, we have, our brain is so powerful, right? It's like that whole reticular activation system, and you start to see a car that you really want, and then you see it all over the place.
Right.
Well, the same thing happens when you put out a goal and you're so clear around it that you literally start to see things pop up to further let you know that, this is actually going to happen. And it's incredible. But here we go. We are starting to wind down. And what I would love to have people be able to do is reach out to you, follow you, hear more about this. This was literally the tip of the iceberg. There is so much.
I know. I feel like we could talk for...
Oh God, I feel like I'm just getting started. This should be a part 1, part 2. I could really talk about some crazies.
Well, I can go way out there, and I do at times on my podcast. So
Well, so how can people find you?
So I'm mostly on Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins is my handle. You can listen to my podcast anywhere that you can find podcasts. It's Life, Death, and the Space Between. And I explore everything from near-death experiences, mediumship experiences, time shifts, channeling, what else? Just how to live better lives, meditation. We go way far and talk about like fifth dimensional beings that might be visiting us. So I play with all ideas and I'm super curious. And my website, dramyrobbins.com, are probably the three best places to find me.
Well, and it's so great because for those that are listening, you know, if there's any kind of like you have a stirring interest, like I don't understand what they're talking about, but maybe there's something more to be thinking about, to be tapping into, definitely go check out Dr. Amy Robbins. And we will definitely have it in the show notes access. But again, what you've shared is so important. It's so impactful. And why limit ourselves to one area? Why just have steps and procedures and systems when you can leverage universal laws? You can leverage what's deep within you. And it all starts with just being quiet, like you said, with meditation or whenever you are in nature. I love it. So at this point, Dr. Amy, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Lit us all up. And everyone, if you haven't hit subscribe on this podcast, please do it right now. We don't want you to miss any future episodes. And for those that need a little bit more, definitely get involved with Amy, and we will see you again next week, where I'm actually going to go deeper into AI and how you can leverage it. Take care, everyone. If you like this video and want to get more like it, head over here.